when people come to the farm, one of the biggest things I try to instill with them or try to explain to them is that we're farmers first. I keep using that expression. We're farmers first. And what I mean by that is I don't ever want anybody thinking of me as a winemaker or a cider maker or anything like that. That's not who we are at all. We're farmers first. In our case, we grow grapes here. Big deal. The rest of our land is into wheat, corn, soybeans. We take the grapes and we turn around and ferment them and make alcohol or wine or cider from them from there. Well, we could do the exact same thing with corn. You can do the same thing with wheat or barley, as you can make a beer from it from that point. So what we really consider ourselves as farmers first. It just happens our product or our crop is grapes, and it happens that the final product is cider and wine. Really, when people come here, we get people visiting us from all over. Yes, we have we're in rural southern Ontario, and a lot of people right around here are used to farmers. That's true. So we get a ton of people come from Toronto up here, from Cambridge, and it's very common. You'll get a couple of young couples, they'll be 30 years old, two young 30-year-old couples. They'll drive up here on maybe their way to the beach and come back. They'll stop in here at the farm, and right off the bat, it's kind of a different experience. They're turning off the highway, gravel driveway. Oh, that's different. Don't see too many of those. And next thing, no yellow strip down the middle. Where do we drive? Next thing, where do we park? No bumper stops. And I tell them it's a farm, park wherever the hell you want, no offense. So what we want is we want people to feel really comfortable and really easy. And another way of doing that is to include them in a lot of things we do. So what we've done here on the farm is we set up a lot of what we call farm experiences, and whereby when people come, we try to involve them in what we do. So an easy one, or one of a very simple one, is like have a name the wine contest or name the cider contest, things like that. But a little more elaborate is in the fall at harvest time, we have this fall harvest party. And what we do is we invite the public to come out and help us pick grapes. They'll come out, they'll help pick for maybe 3 or 4 hours straight. In the morning, we'll take them back into the winery. At lunchtime, we'll give them a nice big hot meal, and then they get to sample some of the new products for next year and carry on. And then after lunch, we have this really cool thing where we have a grape stomp, and where we have grapes in half barrels, and the people get in there and they can pull up their pants and take their socks and shoes off and stomp grapes to their heart content. And it's a really cool feeling those grapes squishy between your toes, and that's really, really cool from that point. But we do lots of other things. With the vineyard, I'm a runner, and I do a lot of trail running and cross-country running, and so I come out here a lot of mornings and I run the rows of the vineyard, and it's really neat. It's really peaceful. It's kind of fun from there. But we want to organize like a barefoot run from there. We want to involve the public in it, sort of a trail association, but we want to do it a little differently. With us, it's a lot of back to nature and along that line, and so simple things like no artificial drinks. This is strictly just water, other homemade foods, things along that line. We want it as natural as possible. Bare feet only from there. We'd like to organize and just keep it as fun orientated, and maybe a grape stomp afterwards, stuff like that. That's what we're all about. The truck's really cool, and it came from a grain farmer, and he bought the thing brand new, took it home, and the very first day, brand new pickup truck, he bolts a tow hitch to the front of the damn thing. And the reason was so he could tow it out to the far fields behind the combine and the tractor and stuff like that, and then drive back home at night. But he wouldn't let anybody else drive it. Only he was allowed to drive it. And he got older and older, and he kept farming and farming, and finally he couldn't farm anymore, stopped farming, so parks a truck, and his kids want it. Nope, kids can't have it. Parks a truck never moves for years and years and years out in driving shit. Finally the dad dies. Kids get the truck. First thing to get it, they sell it. And then I ended up getting it from this guy in between from there. But it's a really cool truck. The big thing about it is it's got a 283 in with a 3 in the tree. And the 283 motor is a really cool motor. Anybody, any gearheads and stuff like that will remember it. And at the time, it was like sending a man to the moon. It was like rocket science, holy jeez. And it's a short stroke V8. So they use it a lot in racers. It's for hot rods, stuff like that. But you can still buy that sucker now in Mexico as a kit motor. And what's it used for is, once again, hot rods for race cars from there. Cider was a big part of our heritage in the past, and it was a big part of our economy. Actually, there were several large orchards all around here, To the south of us in Malmö, there was the foundry that made the large double knuckle cider press. And their two main products was making a double knuckle cider press and also the Lion threshing machine. Okay, and so it employed a lot of people. It was a big part of our economy. And what happened was, in January of 1934, they had a very mild January. It's like a January thaw. And it was that mild that grass actually started, all the snow melted, and grass actually almost started to green up or just show tinges of green. And there was a large high pressure system settled over the American Midwest the end of January, and it drifted up and settled over the whole Great Lake Basin and stayed there for a period of 27 days. In the Walkerton area, right in this area here, the temperature never got above 0 Fahrenheit. And one night, which was February 9th, 1934, that's the night Walkerton holds the record for the coldest recorded temperature in all of Canada. Now, when I say recorded, I'm saying it was a temperature they accepted. I'm sure there was other places colder. After you had a mild January, you had some sap moving in the trees and whatnot, and then all of a sudden the temperature snaps down in February. You'd actually cause the limbs and heavy hardwood and bodywood of the trees to actually explode. And that one night was enough to scare the guys, and it ruined enough of the orchards around here that it ruined the orchards. They never replanted. And our whole apple industry in this part of Ontario went by the wayside just literally overnight from there. And so it's been a big part of our heritage. It's coming back now. Obviously, with the revival of cider in the last few years, it's all of a sudden come back. One of the biggest things we really pride ourselves on is innovation. Cider, you can make cider from almost anything. You can make it, traditionally cider's made from apples, you know, and people think of it as apple cider. But we also make a lot of ciders made from perry they call it. A lot of cider can be made from blends of different things. We made cider from grapes. We made cider from all sorts of things, like from currants and things like that. Our number one cider was called Gravel Run Cider up until a few years ago. And then we ended up changing that name to 66 Pickup, named after the truck I drive. And what we try to do is on the farm here, we try to include people in everything we do as much as possible. So starting about 2 years ago, we introduced growlers. And what a growler is actually it's 1.89 or 1.9 liters in volume. It's sort of like a mini jug with a little handle on the side. And we fill these up with cider, and people can buy them in the basement brand new with cider, and then they can rinse it out, bring it back, and refill it from there. And so really what we're after is we're trying to have that interaction where people can feel part of the process. So it's kind of fun. So like yesterday on a busy day like that, you'll have people come in and they'll have like 2 or 3 of these growlers in each hand, empty. They'll come down, they want to refill them up, put a new cap on, send them home. And if they wish, sometimes people say, well, Gary, I got a bottle of 66 last time, a growler 66. I want to try something different this time. If they change it, we'll switch the label to whatever they want. It's just a fun way of experience. You would not believe how many girls now are buying these growlers and they're using them for weddings. Now, it's really cool. But a lot of girls will buy growlers and they'll set like one growler of 66 on each table plus another growler of maybe 3 in the tree, another one of our ciders, things like that. But we also have another one called Forget the Roses. This is actually an apple raspberry. It's kind of a cool, unique one this year. We have another one called 3 in the Tree, which is a grape apple pear. And we have another one called Rusty Bling, which is a red apple or crab apple, and all the way down the line. We do a ton of experimenting every year. We're constantly bringing out new products. And as we do, sometimes we'll drop off an old one or we'll rotate from there. Oh, I should show you pictures of the wine.
What's the different wine offerings you guys have? Maybe go a little bit.
Okay. Okay, now when it gets to wines, we take our, like I said earlier, we take our wines and ciders very seriously, but we try not to take ourselves too serious. So for instance, our number one red wine is made from a grape called Marquette. It's one of these hardy northern grapes, and it can withstand about minus 35 Celsius temperatures. Our number one red wine's called Kicked Out of the Country Club. It's much like a Merlot Valpolicella, a really unique wine. We also make white wines, Dusty White Glove, made from Frontenac, and Maid's Night Off, and all the way down the line. You can check them on our website. This is a new wine this year. This one's made from rhubarb. We haven't got a label. We just labeled this the other day. Whenever we come up with a new product and we don't have a label for it, the first thing we do is we put it on a white label. or white, sort of like the old Beatles album from years ago, the White Album. Same sort of thing. This one's rhubarb, pure rhubarb. It almost looks so clear, it's almost like moonshine or something. It almost has an illegal look to it. We call it hanky panky. And there's a story that goes with every one of these wines. This one, I think you got to be a little careful with. This one. Anyways, this is pure rhubarb. And then as I said earlier, we have a new one coming out this year. We'll have a dandelion coming out. And we're also doing some work with maple as a different form of blend from there. We're just a small little potato. We're just a small little winery, a little mom and pop operation, and we really want people to enjoy our products. And we don't try to compete in any big volume or anything like that. But one thing that we really enjoy doing is innovating new products or coming up with really unique things. And so everything from our ciders to our wines, everything with us is always a little different. Even the variety of grapes we grow, they're kind of cutting edge. They're kind of like black magic, voodoo. It's like out in the edge. It's like, oh my gosh, those guys are nuts. You know, that's like a little Willie Nelson, whatever. That's what we're all about. Right in this area, what a lot of people don't realize, there was a lot of cider made around here, but there was also a lot of wine made from dandelion. And dandelion was actually a very common wine years ago. It sort of died out and you don't hear much of it anymore. But when I was a kid, we grew up with dandelion wine. That was a common thing for us. Now, with dandelions, there's a little bit of work to it. So what we're after is, this is now almost the mid-May. And what I've done is I've had the one guy who works for me, he came out here with the lawnmower about 4 days ago and we clipped off this area of grass. And what we want to do is, just as the dandelions are starting to show their first flush, we come out and clip them all off. And then we come back about a week and a half later, we want to have a nice even flush, and then we start getting these really large heads. And that's really what we're after. We're after these secondary heads, and they're much bigger. So we're going to come out and we're going to actually pick a whole bunch of these heads in about a week from now. And what we do is we end up taking the green calyx off, and all we're after is that yellow flower. That's the flavoring, or that's the drive or the backbone behind the wine. But it's just a new product. No, I shouldn't say that. It's an old product that we're sort of reviving. It's part of our heritage. Ideally, if we can get the best thing is we get a cold night with sunny days. So the cold night will cause that dandelion to close up, the flower, and then the sunny days like this morning, they're starting to open up, and we want those big yellow flowers opening up. So it's a really cool flower at that point. A lot of energy to it. Makes a really neat wine, really interesting wine. So the stuff we're growing today, these new varieties are called Hardy Northern Hybrids, and they're very unique. They're what they are is a cross between your normal grape or your common grape that you would make wine out of, like Pinot Noir, things like that. They would take a Pinot Noir on one side and they'd cross it with the wild native grape you see growing along the railway tracks and river ditch banks called Vitis riparia. The Vitis riparia has a lot of cold hardiness, disease resistance. You take that, you cross it with a really good winemaking grape, and you take all those crosses and you start selecting and find something good in there. So in this plot, we have about 12 acres, and we have it on low wire, low trellising wire. We do a lot of experiments with low wire, high wire. We're playing around with this. We're trying to do that. We try to do everything as green and environmental as possible from there. One of the biggest things with you'll notice is the reason we're experimenting with high wire is we're trying to reduce chemical input. To give you, I'll back up a little bit. When they crossed the Pinot Noir, or winemaking grape, with Vitis riparia, a wild grape, the wild grape had a lot of disease resistance. But if you notice nowadays, there's a big movement on reduced chemical use and things like that. The amount of chemicals that we need to use on our grapes here is actually literally like a quarter, an eighth, a tenth. And the reason is because a lot of these grapes have a lot higher disease resistance, insect also.
Perfect. And you can chat with me and
Sorry,
talk
guys.
about the names.
As a lot of people know, our name used to be Carrick Wines. And Carrick is named after our township, and it's one of the southernmost townships in Bruce County. Carrick is very close to our hearts and we're very proud of it. And we use that name for the first 2 years. We've been in business now about 5 years. What happened is, one Sunday morning, we were contacted by this other winery, and they basically got a hold of us and said, hey, what are you suckers doing using our name? And we start checking into it, and we find out, sure as heck, these guys had the exact same name as us, and they were from New Zealand. Carrick Wines Inc. Spelt exact same as us right through. The problem is they were selling some of their wines into Canada and into Ontario, into LCBO. And that's where the fluffle started. You see, you can have two companies with the same name, and it's great as long as you stay apart. But as soon as one crosses into the other's territory, that's when you can get into a little trouble. And so here it was, Sunday morning, I find out that we're in trouble with our business name, Carrick Wines. Monday morning, I find out we might have a little trouble with the name of our #1 product called Gravel Run Cider. So you can imagine the problem or the stress I was under. So after about 2 weeks of pouting and crying and dragging my lip on the ground and every other darn thing going, finally I snapped out of it and said, the heck with it, let's just change our name. And so what we ended up doing is when we changed our name to Hoity Toity Cellars. And the reason we chose that name is in typical Canadian fashion, we use it as a platform to make fun of ourselves. So it's sort of like the old Wayne and Schuster humor years ago. And we Canadians are good. We're okay with making fun of ourselves. We're actually enjoy it and partake in it from there. Maybe not so everywhere in the world, but we're pretty good with it. Well, what we're doing with the name Hoity Toity is the exact same. You see, the wine industry in general throughout the world tends to be a little bit, or tends to sometimes come across as a little bit pretentious or a little bit hoity-toity. And it does this in many ways and many levels all the way through. So a lot of times maybe when you go on some wine tours and the person taking you around on a wine tour and they start talking to you in big round pear-shaped tones and they start mentioning words like terroir and stuff like this. But it also happens right down to the restaurant level. When you go into a restaurant nowadays and maybe you're going out, a couple heading out at night, and the server brings you the wine list, there's not 4 or 5 choices of wine on there anymore. There's like 40, there's 50, the whole back sheet is wine. And there's not just 2 Pinot Noirs, there's 6 Pinot Noirs. So a lot of times what people will do is they'll end up defaulting to house red or house white. They sound safe, they sound common, they sound like, oh, a bunch of other people must drink that, so it's got to be a good bet from there. So what we do in typical Canadian fashion is we use that platform, Hoity Toity Cellars, is something to market off of. All of our wines are named around that theme. So for instance, our #1 red wine is called Kicked Out of the Country Club. And people look at it and they laugh and a smile comes to their face and this and that. And I say, no guys, this isn't just some made up name. We actually have experience with this. Like who's kidding who here? This is Carrick Township, okay? And a white wine, we have another one called Dusty White Glove, and then Frosty Fake Pearls, and then another one called Maid's Night Off, and all the way down the line. So all of our wines are based around that humor, and they all have a story attached to them that makes it kind of fun and entertaining. However, when we got to our ciders, naming our ciders, the well was running dry. And finally I just said, guys, forget it. How about we just pick with our ciders, we started naming them after our truck. So the old cider that was called Gravel Run Cider, which was our #1 selling product and still is, it's now become 66 Pickup. And they say, where'd you get that name? I says, it's what I drive. I drive a 66. So all of our ciders are based around a little different theme, humor, maybe the truck and things along that line, where our wines are based more along the hoity-toity. Now, when people come to the farm and I say, look, the wine industry tends to, remember I said a minute ago, the wine industry tends to promote itself or tends to get a little full of itself or tends to take itself pretty serious. And what we say to people is, look, we're farmers, okay? We take our products extremely serious. We take our products very, very serious, but we also say, let's not take ourselves too serious, okay? We're just common people. We love to make great products. We want people to enjoy it. And people come out here and I say, look, the only thing hoity-toity around here is our swans. And they're named Hoity and Toity. That's exactly what it is. But that's all you'll find around here, Hoity and Toity. We're just common people at that point. this is our top vineyard, and this is where we grow most of our production. Now, this is Bruce County, okay? So you got to remember our climate's pretty harsh. We're not like Niagara, we're not like Prince Edward County. We're about 2 steps colder than those guys, and it gets pretty cold here. To give you an idea, the winter before, we had a few nights get down to minus 38 Celsius. A lot of the grapes that you see down in Niagara and places like that, they're all vinifera, and they make excellent wines and beautiful production and stuff like that. But they can't take much cold. And so minus 21, minus 23, minus 25 Celsius, max as much as they can take. And so there was a bunch of amateurists or hobbyist grape breeders. And one of the main ones, the granddaddy of them all, was a guy by the name of Elmer Swenson. And so he lived in an old farmhouse, just like we have here. And he had 8, 10, 12, 15 rows of grapes behind the farmhouse, just sort of like what we got. And he would take this grape and cross it with that grape, and he'd use, it's the old-fashioned method, where you'd have a paper bag and Q-tips and you isolate it and all that sort of stuff. None of this modern technology with gene splicing and tissue culture labs and any of that stuff. He didn't have any of that. He just did it the old way. And so by 1967, the university actually had an open house one Saturday morning. And what they did is a typical university open house. They threw open the front doors, they invite everybody in, say, hey, come on in, see what the heck we're doing. And all of a sudden the back door of the classroom swings open, and in walks this mild, meek, short, very, very quiet, timid man, a dairy farmer, carrying a 6-quart basket of grapes. He walks up to the front of the room and he sets the basket on the front lab bench, right in front of everybody. And you can imagine it's caused a bit of a stir, and it sort of steals the head honcho's thunder. And people stop and they start to mill around, and next thing you know, a few people are plucking a few grapes off and they're trying this and trying that. And the head one guy says to Elmer, he says, where'd you buy these grapes? And Elmer says, I didn't buy them, I grew them. And the guy says, okay, fine, where are you from? You're from Florida, Georgia, California, where are you from? Elmer says, no, about an hour outside of town. And the head guy says, no way, you didn't grow these grapes around here. There's no way you could have done that. By this time, things are getting a little out of hand. And you know, Elmer sort of stole his roadshow and whatnot. So the guy basically says, look, if we're interested, we'll get back to you. We'll take your name and number, and that's the end of it. What happened was, there's a Canadian connection to this. There was a young 20-year-old lab rat from Saskatchewan working at the university that summer. And I got hold of him some years later on the phone, and he was telling me the story. He says, I was there that day that happened. And he said, that was first thing Saturday morning that Elmer did that. First thing Monday morning, the following Monday, me and another lab rat went and signed out the university pickup truck. By that time, we had Elmer's address, and we drove that hour and a quarter, hour and a half out of town to Elmer's farm to see what's going on. These two kids, these two 20-year-olds, right? And I can always remember his quote. He said to me on the phone, he said, Gary, we weren't out of that pickup truck 15 seconds at Elmer's farm, and we could tell that Elmer had a hell of a lot better gene pool in his backyard than we had with all the money we were spending at the university at the time from there. So it was kind of cool. 3 years later, or 5 years after the first encounter, they go and have another open house. Guess what? Elmer shows up again with another 6-quart basket of grapes. But this time it was one variety of grapes. And same sort of thing. He's now an employee of the university, right? He's a gardener, so, you know, that type of thing. And he shows up with a basket of grapes from his grapes at home on the farm. He comes in, he puts them on the counter, everybody sees them, and the same sort of thing. They look at it the whole bit right through, and Elmer puts up his hand and says, hold it, hey guys, just a sec. He says, I don't want anything for these grapes. I don't want any recognition, nothing. All I want you to do, if you think they're worthy, is look at them, give them a name, and release them to the public free of charge. That's all I want you to do. Look at them, give them a name, and release them to the public. I don't want any recognition, nothing for it from there. It turned out that that variety was named not long after, and it was called Swenson Red. It was named after Elmer, and it went on to be one of the foundation varieties for a lot of what we're growing here today. You ready, guys?
Yep.
Okay. We're located in Carrick Township, Bruce County. Just to the south of us is Malmay. Small little town, 1,000 people, rural Ontario. Okay? What a lot of people may not realize is Malmay is the strongest hard apple cider pocket in all of Ontario. making hard apple cider was one of the easiest alcohols to make. So a lot of settlers, when they opened up this area about 1850, Bruce County was the last county to be opened up in this part of Ontario. It was originally called the Queen's Bush, and it's still used. You still see that name a little bit used as the Queen's Bush of Ontario, is this part. Anyways, well, as the settlers started coming and pouring into Ontario from Europe and elsewhere around the world, they started snatching up land, and the deal was, okay guys, you come to Canada, you come to Ontario, but when you come here, the fighting stops. So you had to remember, we had Germans coming here, we had British, we had Irish, we had Scottish, we had Dutch, we had all nationalities settling in Canada. And we started making hard apple cider. Well, hard apple cider was common throughout all of North America. It wasn't just here. Hard apple cider is a very easy alcoholic beverage to make. You can make it in a trough, you can make it in a jug, you can make it in a vessel, almost anything you can make it in. But as time got on, the breweries got a foothold in Ontario and in Canada, and hard apple cider went by the wayside. Beer took over, okay? Hard apple cider went by the wayside pretty much most places in Ontario except right around here. So right here in Malmö, and this about of Malmö, and I'd say maybe a 10-mile radius of Malmö, we retain that hard apple cider image for years and years and years. So when people come into the winery, I come into the basement, if I'm working that day, I instinctively ask everybody that comes here, if I don't know them, I instinctively ask, where are you from? And if they tell me that they're from Toronto or Cambridge or Barrie or something like that, I'll treat them totally differently than if they tell me they grew up around Malmö or within a 10-mile radius or 20-mile radius of here. So if they grew up within about a 10-mile radius of Malmö and they're over the age of 45, 50, chances are they've got a memory, and it may not be good, of hard apple cider, because the cider we made years ago was very harsh. So, and it's really interesting when you get couples and your husbands and wives, and if they're my age, say 55, 56 years old, and they grew up around here, and I'm in the tasting room and they're tasting different wines we make and this and that, and they get to the ciders, quite often the lady will say, no, Gary, it's okay. I'm not going to try the cider. And what she's really saying to you is she can remember something from 40 years ago and it wasn't good. Okay. Nowadays, to give you an idea, 40 years ago, no self-respecting lady would drink cider. Nowadays, 40 years later, 50 years later, females make up, I think it's around 56, 58% of cider consumption worldwide. When we make cider almost identical to wine. You use controlled temperature, you use yeast strains, sanitation, bubblers, all the same technologies you do making wine right through. And the product is very, very refined, very, very crystal clear, very, very palatable from there. Okay? Now, but there still is some hard cider made. There's a large apple press to the south of us in Malmö, and that's where everybody gets their apples pressed in this area, and we get ours pressed there too. Now, this particular bottle, never mind the label on the here, this particular bottle was given to me by a fellow by the name of Pat Weber. Pat Weber just passed away just recently. Pat Weber is considered, or a lot of people consider Pat, he was a retired farm mechanic for many years and into his mid-70s and so, and a lot of people consider Pat sort of like the cider master of Malmö, or the champion cider master. And he made a lot of different ciders and wines, and very well respected. This is one of his last bottles of cider that year, I should say. This is a cider he made from that year. But Pat had learned from some of our experiences. You see, when you make cider, one of the biggest things you want to do is, once it's done fermenting, is you want to bottle it off and seal it so it doesn't re-ferment. And Pat figured that out many years ago, but us 15-year-olds 40 years ago never did. So this is what it looks like. I'm just sort of saving it.